Gris is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there, and this only really works if it's called Gris. It's spelled Gris. I've been calling it Gris. It might be Gris, Gris, Gry. The S might be silent. It might not be. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that Devolver Digital seems to have an eye for picking up interesting indie-flavoured games and publishing them. And it's hit another decent run with Gris. I'm just going to call it Gris. This is an emotions platformer, as I like to call them. And I almost didn't pick this up because I've seen plenty of that. Interesting art style, not particularly challenging platforming, and emotions. And that's fine. There are some really good, emotional indie games overall. This one's about depression. They all are. And this one is very on the nose about that. Not particularly subtle with its metaphors and its visuals, but that doesn't mean it's bad. You can be fairly obvious and still be entertaining and meaningful and interesting. I've got all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to your delicates, but I get away with it because I've tricked some people into thinking that I'm okay. And this doesn't need to trick anyone. It actually is more than okay. It's a very enjoyable ride. I hesitate to use enjoyable mostly because the protagonist is having a right miserable time of it. But Gris is nonetheless a beautiful, visually striking platforming game with some light puzzling. There's nothing that will keep you particularly challenged for long. A lot of the solutions are fairly straightforward and only takes a bit of logical thinking. But nonetheless, it's full of evocative imagery, such as this, rocks with legs that wander about the place. It makes a great use of zooming in and out. There are some games, I'm thinking of the recently released Below, where the camera can be pulled so back from the action and the space feels so wasted. But here, it makes very distinct use of contrast and silhouette and lighting and just some really wonderful architecture that when it pulls out, it's for a reason. And it feels isolating on purpose in a way that only helps the atmosphere of the game. Now, while you spend a lot of the time just walking and jumping and solving some puzzles using that, the protagonist has a number of abilities that are earned throughout gameplay, such as this. Here we're seeing you go into the water and her dress takes the form of a sort of a manta ray, I guess, or one of the rays, and any member of the ray family, and you can glide through the water with ease, and it's an incredibly satisfying little mechanic, that, because you instantly turn into it the moment you hit water, and you're out of it the moment you're, out of it. And it's just done really stylishly and evocatively. There's something fun about, just simply fun about doing the whole Echo the Dolphin thing and just splashing out and splashing back into the water. You can also turn into a cube. Sorry, it just amused me to be quite blunt about it, but that is what you can do. And that's used to smash through floors, to resist strong wind. But then again, when you learn to do something, don't expect to keep doing it. The game's very good at not belabouring the point with any of its mechanics. Once you start doing something in the game, you won't be doing that for the entire thing. This is one of those games that I've praised quite a few games about this. It's one of those games that has some very simple mechanics, but manages to do a variety of things with them, rather than just focus on one good thing and do that to the point of, nauseum, which you don't want to do. If you're good at something, stick to it, but don't make people sick of it. And that's something Gris does very well, is it never hangs around too long, and that goes for the entire game. It's one of those games that won't take you particularly long to beat. You can deal with it in one sitting. I know some people have issues with that, but this is one of those games where it would outstay its welcome if it lasted any longer. By the time it ends, I felt that it was the perfect place to stop it, which, you know, can be difficult for a game, nailing pacing and knowing when to call it quits. But this game certainly is very well paced, has some wonderful crescendos that build up. Gavin from Podquisition recommended this to me, said that at times it felt on par with Journey when it came to some of the inspiring moments. And there are some quote-unquote chase sequences in the game, and a few moments where you're gliding and sliding that really are incredibly beautiful. Gris stands out with a gorgeous art style, everything looks hand-drawn, and there's a limited colour palette. Colours are unleashed on the world as you progress, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to look bland. A ton of shading and contrast can take this, which is essentially white, black and red, and give it a whole sense of visual variety. I especially love how various environmental effects can look like brushstrokes on a canvas. We can see that with the clouds in this scene here. And there's a reason I used the game soundtrack at the beginning of this video for the intro instead of the usual Jim's Big Ego track, because it's lovely. It's got a beautiful soundtrack, the music is fantastic. It really sells the emotions that the game is going for. The right piece of music can heighten the atmosphere of any scene, of any gameplay sequence, and the right music is used in this game pretty much consistently the whole time. Whether you're chasing a little cute robot thing through the forest or being chased yourself by a giant evil bird, Gris's audio-visual elements have you completely covered. The biggest thing going against Gris is the fact that it's mechanically quite standard. There are a lot of studios out there now making their, you know, beautifully bleak, emotional, got a little bit more to say than the average game indie game. You got your Supergiant games, you got your Fulbright, you know, not necessarily making platformers, but still each one trying to stand out with their indie with a big I game. And Gris is just a little bit too standard in a mechanical sense. It's a decent platformer game, but it is, at its heart, well, a decent platformer game. The puzzles are, as I said, very straightforward. The swimming and the floor smashing is fun, but it's nothing we haven't seen before. And the whole conceit of walking around not doing much, looking at beautiful scenery that happens in between the puzzles is, again, stuff we've seen before. That goes back as far as the aforementioned Journey. Well, I mean, it goes back to before Journey. Gris isn't bad at any one thing it's trying to do, but if you've played a lot of indie games, especially ones about anxiety and depression, Gris isn't excelling in any one element either. It's all very, very good, but there is a bit of a sense of having done it before and seen it before. That said, that's not a terrible criticism to level at the game. It is very good at what it does, it's just in a bit of a stuffed niche. If you're a fan of the indie trendsetter crowd, then I could recommend this. I don't think it will blow minds if you are into a lot of those types of games, because you just will have seen it so much, but I think you'll get fun out of it. I think a lot of people would get fun out of this. It's not challenging, especially. You can't really die in the game, but then again, I'm not one of these people that think games have to constantly kill your character in order to be good. Ultimately, Gris is a beautiful and expressive game with very few bad marks against it. I do think a lot of people will play it, a lot of people will love it. I don't necessarily think it will go down in history as one of the big defining moments for indie games, but that's a high bar anyway, so I think Gris is well worth checking out. I enjoyed all my time with it, it didn't outstay its welcome, and it is very pretty to see in motion. And the soundtrack as well. I mean, I don't talk about music enough when I do these videos. I need to do that more. But yeah, the soundtrack for this is probably the best, like the strongest element. Really, really wonderful. And that's Gris, is a story all about how, etc.